Mondays with Mike is a podcast by two friends from the Seattle area. Originally intended as a news analysis podcast, as of spring 2025, it has lately mostly covered current events. Show notes can be found at mondayswithmike.ddns.net. Mondays with Mike is your weekly helping of opinion and critical analysis of the day's news. Bud asks the questions, and Mike supplies the takes. Start a social revolution. Make friends with your neighbor. Disagree without being disagreeable. And remember, if it's Mondays, it's with Mike. Jose Diaz-Balart on Saturday, this weekend anyway, might have been Saturday. No, it was Saturday. Saturday, May 31st. Was like, Hexeth says that invasion of Taiwan by China might be imminent. And it immediately up go my alert signals. And then I think about it, and the segment goes from minute 10 to minute 12 of the Saturday news, and I think if it was really imminent, maybe it would be headline news. I don't really know what to think about that segment. Like, we know that Taiwan has U.S. missiles, as does Ukraine. We know that China is working on troop ships that extend inland significantly so that they don't have to deal with beachheads in the same way. And everybody knows China intends at some point to conquer or reconquer, depending on how you look at it, Taiwan. Is this going to happen this year? And then Trump said that they should pay for their own defense, but should we be doing more for Taiwan?
Yeah, the risk is always there, right? Due to the proximity of Taiwan to China and the fact that China is just significantly bigger than Taiwan and has a bigger military. The risk is always there. It's just a question of how much is the cost of China invading Taiwan to China and whether China wants to bear that cost. And so far, the answer has always been too great and don't want to. That the U.S. has signaled that it will support Taiwan and that it will help with the defense of Taiwan. I don't know. Anytime I hear Trump say something to the effect of NATO should pay for it or anyone that we're helping should pay for it, I always think about the fact that we are purposely paying more money because we're getting something in return. The whole point of it, of why the US spends so much money, is that we are preventing a greater expenditure of money, such as a world war, right? That you spend the money now. This is where I'm always confused for US policy in its spending, is that we're willing to fork over just exorbitant amounts of money for defense and military stuff, but not for domestic policies like healthcare and fire prevention. It's a whole thing. But the point is, sure, we could ask Taiwan to pay more, and I'm almost certain they probably would pay more, right? Because it's to their benefit to not be invaded by China. It would damage significantly their infrastructure in their country, and it would just be bad all around. And Taiwan's a very highly developed place that the world economy depends on due to the semiconductors. It's a huge deal. In terms of whether the risk is imminent, I'm not so sure, right? I don't think that China wants to ruffle the feathers of the American eagle, as it were, because the U.S. has very publicly stated that we will defend Taiwan. I look at it the same way as North and South Korea. Sure, there's an armistice with North Korea, and technically the threat is always there of it happening, but will it happen? Most likely not, because the U.S. has a deterrent in place with all those troops on the border. It sends a very strong message, loud and clear. Don't do it. Don't actually do anything. Just sit there and make noise, saber rattle, but don't actually do anything. Because if you do it, you face the full force and power of a very annoyed giant superpower. And make no mistake, the US is still a superpower. We've got a lot of aircraft carriers, we've got a lot of really big planes, we've got a lot of really big weapons. No country has decided to really mess in a serious way with the United States for quite some time. The wars we had, we were always in a much stronger position in terms of the weaponry we had available to us. It was just a question of political will, of whether we wanted to win the war decisively or just endure the war, as it were. And what do I mean by that? In Afghanistan and Iraq, we could have almost definitely won the war if we just spent twice as much money. But we didn't want to do that because it was very expensive. But the same deal here. Like Taiwan is part of our national security policy of the pivot to the Pacific. If you look at the National Defense Directive or whatever it's called, the thing the government puts out every year, like what are our priorities.
You mean the Obama Pacific pivot, that thing?
It's not just Obama; it's still continuing.
Okay, but he started it.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's what I'm referring to is when that pivot
Yeah.
happened. That's still ongoing. We're still very much there. Look, I don't think China, frankly, it's not even in China's MO, at least for right now, that they engage in big wars. Their big thing is economic attrition and warfare right now. Like maybe he's just trying to rally support around investing more money in technology or resources to help Taiwan or in the Pacific theater. I don't know, but frankly, I don't know why he'd be talking about it. But the point is that yes, the threat is always there. It's just a question of whether China wants to get thorns on its hand if they tries to pick the rose of Taiwan from the garden of opportunities, as it were. The internal stuff is a little. I guess they view Taiwan as an internal conflict or issue.
Sure, yeah, they do. There was a post World War II piece of American information, probably a training video for some of the Army or something. And it was like, the war we just fought was terrible. Measure the cost in money, there isn't that much money. The cost in life, we can only guess at that. So I just think to myself, these are big gambles that the great powers make, and it's all one planet. We need to get along. We need to get along eventually. Hey, peace, man. So hopefully they decide not to this year, and hopefully they decide not to next year, etc.
Oh, I'm optimistic that there won't be a conflict in Taiwan within the next 4 years because the political calculus is just, again, terrible. It's not great. It costs a great deal for China to actually do it. The resources Taiwan has to defend itself are much greater than the size of the country. And the US has publicly stated that it'll back Taiwan. So that risks World War III. And no matter how big or how prosperous China is, I don't think they want World War III, honestly, because the next World War is going to be just ridiculously big and complicated because of nuclear weapons.
Ukrainian Trojan horse. Ukraine, or Ukrainians, figured out how to put war drones into shipping containers and deploy them at the same time at various points across Russia. They targeted Russian aircraft. They targeted Russian strategic bombers. They may have targeted other things. This strikes me as significant because of what it implies for the future of shipping containers and their capacity to serve as instruments of war, or for that matter, instruments of terrorism, or for that matter, instruments of vandalism, instruments of many things. Trump has compared the war between Russia and Ukraine to a war between children. Meanwhile, and I'm sure he's aware of this, he's said this before, but meanwhile, Russia's at 1 million casualties, Ukraine 400,000, according to NBC News. How long will this go on? Anything the West can do? What does it say about drone technology?
It will go on as long as Russia wants it to go on, or as long as Ukraine can endure. The moment Ukraine loses support or doesn't have enough people, it's probably going to surrender. Russia has way more people and it has much more resources and weapons. So it can outlast Ukraine in a pure war of attrition. There's no question. Russia was able to throw tens of millions of people at World War II and survive. I expect that they would be able to do the same here if they needed to. One of the ways that Russia would quit is if the attacks from Ukraine caused such a decrease in morale inside Russia that it led to a civil war or it led to some kind of coup d'etat. I don't think that's going to happen because Putin's got a very effective apparatus for maintaining control within the country, but it could, right? It's one way that big countries lose. It's how Russia, in some ways, lost the Cold War. But in terms of that question of How long will it go on? It's really just a matter of will on the part of both parties. But for Ukraine, it's resources. For Russia, it's political will. That the weakness of Russia is that because it's so big, there's different groups within Russia that could work to change the political apparatus, as it were, to change the structure. But Ukraine's liability is that it just doesn't have enough resources or people, and that every casualty from Ukraine is much more significant than every casualty from Russia. So when you say a million for Russia and 400,000 for Ukraine, as a percentage of their population, it's way more for Ukraine of what those casualties mean. So that's the whole issue. For the other question, what was the other question?
Anything the West can do. The West is doing stuff, but anything more the West can do?
Absolutely. Right now, it's still in the stage of a proxy war of Ukraine as the one bearing the bulk of the casualties and the fighting. If it got really bad, there could always be a military intervention similar to what happened in the first Gulf War between Kuwait and Iraq, where there could be a coalition of the willing of the US and a whole bunch of other countries saying enough of this, and they just step in to stop Russia. And they say, stop doing this. And then they establish some kind of peacekeeping force, like similar to what's happening in South Korea right now in the DNC. That could happen. Will it happen? Probably not, but it could, right? If the situation got severe enough. The only real risk right now with any kind of escalation of that nature is again nuclear war, right? Russia has said that they're willing to use nukes if they feel the situation's bad enough. If the situation did get severe enough, if nukes were used, it would be an escalation to a degree that I don't think humanity's quite prepared for the level of nuclear weapons we're talking about because the technology has advanced so much. It's just the risks are so great. But in terms of what more the West could do, all the things that Ukraine's asking for more weapons, more money, more assistance with intelligence sharing, just more, right? Of everything that they could add to assist Ukraine in succeeding in its efforts. The big issue is that Ukraine only has so many people who can fight, and if they reach a point where they can't fight anymore, they'll probably have to surrender. But I will say this, it was very creative what they did with the drones in terms of how they got the drones so far within Russian territory, and they successfully got everybody who brought the drones in out, right? That in terms of the gains they made, it was a huge message they sent to Russia. We can strike you very far into your territory with very little risk to us, right? That sends its own kind of message. But again, this is one of those situations where Ukraine could win every engagement, that Ukraine could attack Russia over and over again. It's a war of attrition. All Russia has to do is outlast them or use nukes. If Russia uses nukes, that's bad. It's terrible. It will be Armageddon at a level we haven't seen, and I hope not to see in our lifetime, because it'll create a cascading effect that's just awful. Or they just keep throwing soldiers at the fight. They've got way more people than Ukraine does. I think they've got three times, or no, five times the population.
And Russia's existence is not in jeopardy.
Yeah,
So they don't.
Russia's the only thing they'll feel is economic pressure. And so long as China is helping Russia out, and China is pretty much immune to any kind of
Yeah.
we saw that when Trump put on the huge tariffs, and they're like, okay, whatever. So long as China is willing to help Russia out to the degree it is, I don't see a situation where Russia loses. What I do see is Russia not winning as much as it could have, meaning that it doesn't seize as much territory or it doesn't gain as much as it wanted. I could see that, but that would require consistent pressure applied from the West, which they could do. They could impose more sanctions. They could seize more assets of Russian oligarchs, mainly to chip away at those edges, right? Take all the rich people's stuff. All the oligarchs have property all over the world. Take all their stuff for supporting an illegal war of aggression in Ukraine, right? There are laws on the books. There's stuff that they could do that they have the power to do as countries. They're just not doing as much as they could. But yeah,
Mhm.
to that question, is there more the West could do? Absolutely. 100%. There absolutely is more stuff the West could do. Europe and Canada and the US and NATO in general. There's plenty of stuff they could do. The big risk is that if the effort and the squeeze, as it were, on Russia is so great as to make life in Russia unlivable or unpleasant enough for the people of Russia, that it threatens or jeopardizes Putin's power, then the situation could spiral out of control. I don't know that we're there yet, but this is so tricky, right? Because Russia's a permanent member of the UN Security Council, and it's not so clear that we're ever actually going to go to war with permanent members of the Security Council. Because at the point where we like go into a huge war of that magnitude, like all bets are off. It's going to be just it's some crazy chaotic thing unless the next war is fought in like a matter of minutes when all the computer systems are shut down by some technology we don't know about because they do a mass EMP and drop all the planes out of the sky and shut off all the drones.
That at least would be a relief in terms of as much as it can be. If it was, we don't even have to do nukes. We have this technology we weren't telling you about. Off.
Yeah, no. So here's what I'll say about that. If such a technology exists, like it's a thing you only use in case of emergency, break glass, right? It's the kind of thing that you would only want to tip your hand on having if you absolutely needed to use it. So say there was a technology to shut down ICBMs in the sky so they just plummet to the earth harmlessly, or like an anti-gravity weapon or something where you do a tractor beam and stop the missiles mid-flight. If such a thing existed, you would not want to use it until the very last second because the moment it's used, other countries could figure out eventually how to replicate it. So that's the thing that I would think about is if such a technology existed or such a defense existed, you would never want to actually reveal that fact until the very, very last second that you really needed it. But no, you're right. It would be great if the wars of the future were just stopped immediately from an EMP or really clever hacking or something that there's no fighting.
I have this unfortunate conclusion that I've drawn where I think, or I hypothesize that it might be, the most important legacy that our generation leaves, ready for it, is, I think, is whether we contain nuclear weapons more or less. I just think about how if they get into the wrong hands, it could harm people centuries down the line, and how that'll be a very big thing for many generations future. But regardless of whether that hypothesis is true or false, it strikes me as much like the India-Pakistan thing, where they're there, they both got nukes. Where the U.S. is here, Russia's here. They both got nukes. As a result, they're both going to be there when the dust settles. Is what I think is going to happen to it, because wars, like, what is the cost in money? There isn't that much money. I wish that we could leave a more peaceful and more stable world. But as far as the current conflict goes, given the fickleness of the U.S. government and the potential fickleness of other governments toward foreign aid, U.S. aid, all of it, I like a lot of baby boomers still have a fair amount of money, and I would hope that they would see their way clear to, if the government won't fund it, personally funding a lot of aid to mitigate the suffering in that part of the world, because it's really just so awful that we have a war. A war anywhere would be bad, but a war in continental Europe, that's traditionally a big flashpoint for conflict. So the money that you support peace with, the cost of war, the cost in money, there isn't much money. The cost in lives, we can only guess at that. So that would be my hope, would be for peace and understanding among nations and the containment of nuclear technology.
So, talking about that, the containment of nukes, the whole issue right now with the Ukraine war is that there was a bargain struck to denuclearize Ukraine. Ukraine had a whole bunch of nuclear weapons after the fall of the Soviet Union, and a bunch of the powerful countries of the world, including Russia, went to Ukraine and said, "Hey, give up your nukes, and we will protect you with a security agreement if you're attacked because you don't have nukes." Look at where we're at right now, not however many years after that agreement, where clearly the words that were on paper weren't as good as the threat of nukes themselves. That's the whole issue of this discussion, is that countries view weapons as a way of deterring war. And it's clear that the words on paper were only as good as the willingness of the leaders of those countries that agreed to the security agreement to follow that agreement. That if we're talking about like views of international relations, realism still trumps almost everything else. The most significant symbol of power still in our modern day is either an aircraft carrier or a nuclear weapon. An aircraft carrier is scary because it never leaves the ocean, so it can show up pretty much anywhere on the planet. And a nuclear weapon is scary because it has devastating force. It's very powerful. Frankly, how this war between Ukraine and Russia gets resolved is going to change that calculus for countries even more, because of the fact that they're made between Ukraine and a whole bunch of the countries that Ukraine would be protected, that its sovereignty would be respected. Clearly, that situation has deteriorated with the loss of Crimea and the current territorial loss of Russia taking so much land. But honestly, I'm more scared of the war between Pakistan and India, because Pakistan has their nuclear weapons policy is considerably different than India's, and it's scary if that war actually escalated to a version that Pakistan would feel they need to use their weapons. It's not so clear that there's any tools in the toolbox available to the US or any other country to stop a country that has nukes from using those nukes. Once that cat is out of the bag, once that Pandora's box is open, the world is a much different place. And so you're right. Yeah, the future is going to be dictated, at least for now, with nuclear containment, of stopping nuclear proliferation. But I'll add one caveat. If unless a stronger weapon comes around, a stronger weapon would be something that could stop a nuclear weapon from detonating, or that could contain the force of it. If somebody figures out through space travel how to move celestial objects like an asteroid or a meteor or the moon, right, and crash it into Earth, that would be problematic too, because it's not like you can stop that all too well unless you have a way to mitigate that. There's any number of problems. If someone figures out how to trigger a volcano, how to trigger an earthquake, like there's other things that exist in the realm of possibility that we just haven't seen. Because again, the smartest option for countries would be to never tip their hand that they even have a technology like that until they actually have to use it. Let us hope and pray that we never get to a situation again where a country feels they have to use a weapon on the scale of a nuclear weapon. We don't want countries to feel like their back is against the wall. Always give them some kind of out so that they can wind down conflict. That's the whole point of why the UN exists, is to provide a forum and an opportunity for countries to back away from conflict in such a way that it doesn't devastate the planet. We all feel the costs of war. We know this from World War II. For war at that scale is just too much. It's just too much damage, too much devastation, too much constant fear. And we don't want that again. Diplomacy is soft power is good. That's why, again, I mentioned this before, but I'll mention it again. The world is a less safe place when they cut all this foreign aid. The foreign aid was what was helping to generate goodwill and a willingness on the part of countries to listen in diplomatic discussions and agreements, as opposed to turn to violence to secure resources for their survival. Chaos is bad. Structure, predictability, and stability are good. The way we get to stability is to have less wars, not more wars. And the way to have less wars, not more wars, is to figure out a way to get countries what they want without destroying the world in the process. And that's tricky. I'm not so sure anyone's got a real handle on it, at least in this generation. And it takes real leadership. It takes real moral leadership and courage to do the things that you need to when they need to be done, especially when we're talking about what the West could do to try and help Ukraine. It's a careful path to tread.
It's big, it stinks, it's in the southern Caribbean, and it's headed this way. There's the largest seaweed mass ever. It wreaks havoc on wildlife, not to mention tourism, which we know is very important. You can't fish. Just look at the satellite image. Musk calls the Trump bill a disgusting abomination. But isn't this seaweed the real disgusting abomination? So, we seem to be having gross stuff in the ocean. Why can't we do anything about this? Maybe we should bioengineer, this is facetious, but maybe we should bioengineer a seaweed virus, get some gain-of-function research going on this, and is it time to follow in the footsteps of Caligula and declare war on the sea? So what do we do about this seaweed mass?
Look, we can do something about this. They made a mosquito that was engineered to kill other mosquitoes, right? They did it. There was an island where they did it. It happened. Goodbye mosquitoes. There are ways to address these kinds of things. It's just a question again of political will, and the ocean's complicated because no country has jurisdiction over the ocean. So it's just all of us, right? It's all the countries can do something about it or do nothing about it. And as we know, countries don't like to spend money unless they absolutely have to, and it's not so clear that they absolutely have to on this issue. That wherever this large, massive seaweed eventually drifts, it'll then become the problem of whoever gets it, right? Nobody wants to be left holding that mess in their hands. But yeah, there's plenty that could be done for natural messes like this. Science in particular, I'm sure, because look, some of the limits that exist of doing stuff within the jurisdiction of a country, they don't exist in the open ocean. So if somebody really took it upon themselves to be like, I want to solve this problem, they could try. I'm not so sure they succeed, but what is clear is there's not as many impediments to them trying to do it. I feel like if somebody could figure out a way to turn the seaweed into a way to make money, of just turning into a profit, then it's there for the taking. It's moving, but it's not going anywhere particularly fast. It's just there. And so if somebody can use some ingenuity and figure out some way to make money from it, then they could harvest the heck out of it and goodbye seaweed, right?
It's a
Seaweed
lot of
has uses
biomass.
for something. It's not all dead, right? It's just seaweed. It's just I don't know if it is dead seaweed or not. Is it
No, most of it is alive. It's alive and growing, and it's grown a lot in the last. Some of it may have died, but no, much of it is alive.
then while it's still alive, it has utility. The whole issue, I guess, is the fact that there's just so much of it and that there's the sheer amount of money and resources you need to collect all of it is probably pretty staggering because we're talking about millions of tons of it. Think of all the things in life where you view it as a liability, but then someone comes along and says, this isn't really a liability. We can find some use for it. So that's what we need. We need somebody out there who's smart and understands seaweed, who figures out a way to just make a use for it. Because you make a use for it, and then the power of the market will respond. There were gold rushes that depleted gold from places because people were like, we need to get that gold, right? Got to get the gold to make money. Silver, other resources. Same deal here. It could happen. It just needs to happen. Some smart person who understands the
Yeah.
seaweed needs to figure it out.
It's a lot of biomass. If anything, it could be dried and burned for fuel.
Sure, whatever. Find something to do with it so that it doesn't pose a threat. View it as an opportunity. That's the way I look at all of these things. Like instead of going, this is a problem, go, this is an opportunity. Find something to do with it and then do that. Something that provides utility, develops a return, whatever. That's the way I view this. It's stop viewing it as a problem. View it as something that can be solved. Right?
Yeah, not a war on the sea, but a sea opportunity. Mondays with Mike.